The subcommittee is meeting today to conduct oversight of the budget request for the agencies under our jurisdiction. As I stated in our first budget hearing, under the Constitution, Congress has the power to tax and to spend, and we have a responsibility to make sure that it is done wisely. There are finite federal resources, and agencies must be held accountable for their spending and prioritization of programs and policies. Federal funding for programs and services for federally recognized Indian tribes and U.S. Insular Affairs spans several federal agencies. However, the majority of that spending falls within two Department of Interior agencies, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or BIA, and the Office of Insular Affairs, or OIA. This hearing will focus on the President's fiscal year 2024 budget request for BIA and OIA, along with how best to allocate funds and what changes may need to be made. Over the past several years, there has been a substantial increase in federal funding across agencies and programs, including those that serve Native communities. This increased spending means a higher deficit and intense concern from many Americans about the fiscal future facing our nation. We are at $32 trillion in debt, and that is unsustainable. Beginning with the BIA, this agency is charged with honoring the United States treaty and trust responsibilities towards American Indians and Alaska Natives and the 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States. The agency administers 55 million surface acres and 57 million acres of subsurface mineral estates held in trust by the United States for tribes and for individual American Indians and Alaska Natives. It also provides programs for tribes that address community services, public safety, and to encourage economic opportunity for Native communities. The President's budget proposes a $684 million increase for the BIA for fiscal year 2024. It proposes to transfer 105L leases and contract support costs to mandatory spending, which would then bypass the appropriation process. It also proposes to focus more resources on conservation, so-called climate change, and energy development that is allegedly renewable, which can have its own profound impacts on our environment, our wildlife, and our fisheries. Not to mention the fact that such energy resources are astronomically expensive and tend to be viable only with substantial federal subsidies, which increases our cost of energy across the board, resulting in energy poverty, including within our Native communities. This focus on so-called climate change and alternative energy cannot take away from the BIA's responsibility to ensure tribes are not limited in opportunity for natural resource development on their tribal lands, which is an issue that has been brought to me repeatedly by numerous tribes from around the country. For many tribes, real property holdings are the basis for social, cultural, and religious life, and often their single most important economic resource. Access to resource development cannot be pared back in the name of broadly and nebulously defined climate goals. History has shown that we can balance conservation and resource development, and tribes are actually the experts on this. They have knowledge and the experience to make it work, and BIA should be supporting those efforts of self-determination. The President's fiscal year 2024 budget also includes a proposed $30.5 million for tribal land consolidation, without indicating that intensive improvements have been made from the way that previous land buyback programs have been managed. Throwing more money at the complicated issue of land fractionation will not get us anywhere without reconsidering how to deal with the issue of probate and focusing resources on how to pursue outcomes on this issue that are the very best for our tribes. Turning to the OIA. This is an agency charged with carrying out responsibilities for U.S. insular areas. This includes the U.S. territories of Puerto Rico, American Samoa, as well as implementing the Compacts of Free Association, or COFA, for the Republic of Palau, the Federated States of Micronesia, and the Republic of the Marshall Islands. OIA's budget shows a $211 million decrease for fiscal year 2024, My understanding, however, is that this reflects the expiration of the economic assistance to the Marshall Islands and Micronesia under the current COFA, and the fiscal year 2024 budget does not include proposals for a future COFA that is in the process of being renegotiated. While it was expected that this information would be communicated separately, I would encourage this administration to be more open and communicative regarding how much funding future COFA agreements will cost, and have a discussion with Congress about where that funding should come from and which department receives and administers it. Continuing oversight of BIA and OIA to ensure they are fulfilling their mission efficiently and effectively for the benefit of Native communities and the insular areas is a main priority of this subcommittee. Today, that means having a productive discussion about these agencies' budgets and where resources should be allocated. Both BIA and OIA are charged with the responsibility of maintaining the important relationships between the U.S. government and the tribes and the U.S. insular areas, respectively. I want to thank the witnesses for being here to testify today, and I look forward to your testimony. The Department of Interior recently proposed new land to trust regulations and tribal regulations just as recently as December 2022. That comment period ended on March 1st, 2023. The committee has heard from several tribes and stakeholders that they wanted additional time to comment on these regulations and that more time to provide comments would be beneficial. Have you heard the same concerns from tribes and stakeholders regarding these new regulations?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have not heard that from any tribes that I'm aware of. We did get several requests from members of the public to extend the comment period, but we did not extend beyond what we had already provided in the notice.
This is a pretty complicated area, isn't it?
The land in the trust process?
Yes.
It can be.
Okay. Would you consider extending the comment period so that tribes and members of the public can fully participate in this rulemaking?
Madam Chair, we've received hundreds of comments on these proposed regulations and believe that we have met our commitment under the law, and we're intend to proceed with the rulemaking.
Okay. Mr. Newland, when was the last time there was a complete audit of the BIA?
I don't have that answer for you. I'd have to follow up, ma'am.
Okay. Ms. Cantor, the Department of Interior has received $6.6 billion in funding from the Inflation Reduction Act, or, well, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA. The committee is concerned that specific IRA programs addressing climate change overlap with other existing non-IRA programs. It looks like grant awardees could potentially qualify for multiple grants for the same project, creating the risk of double dipping and wasteful spending. What measures are in place to prevent multiple grants from being awarded for the same project, both before the grant is awarded and then through oversight while the grant funds are being expended?
Madam Chair, we have a very competitive process, and a process that requires assessments of all these requests that we receive. To my knowledge, we don't have any projects that have been submitted twice and have received funding, more than once. I will go back and check, but my understanding is that because of the process, full, proof process that we have, that's not the case.
Well, is there a checklist or some other mechanism by which OIA staff verifies that there is no wasteful duplication?
My understanding is that we have checklists that we follow.
Who ultimately at OIA is accountable for preventing waste, fraud, and abuse? Who at OIA is accountable for preventing waste, fraud, and abuse in terms of the money that you are appropriated for these kinds of programs?
Madam Chair, we all follow all the rules, and I'm responsible for, making sure that my staff follows all the rules and procedures.
Okay. Mr. Newland, just a couple more questions. I wanted to ask about the Indian Land Consolidation Program and the budget request for purchasing highly fractionalized land. I have here that the department testified back in 2017 that the amount of funds allocated to the land buyback program resulting from the Cobell settlement did very little to reduce Indian land fractionalization. Why does the department think that another $22.5 million will be beneficial to consolidate fractionated Indian land when the department testified just a few years ago that funds allocated under the Cobell settlement did very little to reduce this problem?
Madam Chair, I disagree with that assessment from that testimony. Through the Cobell settlement, we were able to consolidate more than 100,000 fractionated parcels with 3 million equivalent acres of land returned to tribal trust status. The request is intended because, as you noted in your opening comment, probate is an issue. And we're also attempting to address that through this budget request with the transfer of some of the probate functions over to a different part of the Office of Hearings and Appeals. But if we don't continue these investments, land will go out of trust through the fractionation process. And by 2038, more land will be fractionated in Indian country than when we started the Cobell settlement.
Okay. Just very quickly, this year's request for Assistant Secretary Administrative Support is for $1.81 million, which includes support for the Office of Self-Governance. Is negotiated rulemaking required by Section 413 of the Progress for Indian Tribes Act? Can you explain where the funds to support that rulemaking prior to April 20th, 2023 came from? Very quickly, because I'm out of time.
I'd have to follow up with you, Madam Chair. Be happy to do that.
All right, we appreciate that. Thank you.